Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ASDC's Thursday Train to Win webinar. Today's topic is state party compliance and Q&A. So we have some great compliance experts that are here to provide updates and answer your questions. Before we hop into today's webinar, I just want to make you aware of a few housekeeping items. The first is that you are in listen-only mode as an attendee to this webinar. But if you have a question, you can click the raise my hand icon and we will get you unmuted. Or you can type your questions into the questions box and we'll be sure to get those read out and get some answers for you. Lastly, if you are tracking with us on social media, please feel free to use the Twitter handles as well as the hashtags listed there at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jackson Ravens to get us started.
Thanks, Janae. Thanks so much. This is Jackson Ravens, Chair of the Washington State Democrats, and I want to thank you for joining us today on this compliance webinar. This, I think, is our 2-year anniversary. If memory serves, Neil Reiff and I, along with the Grassroots Democrats, started doing these calls in 2012 about this time of year. So things are going well, and we're really glad that you're back and you're joining us for this. Today, in addition to Neil Reiff, who is a lawyer at Sandler, Reiff, Lamb, Ronstein, and Perkins Coie, we also have Karl Sandstrom and Graham Wilson with Perkins Coie, who I'm sure you've heard from and met before. So a great team of folks. We're actually changing the agenda a little bit today because we have a oh, actually, it looks like Janae might have corrected it a bit. No, we're actually changing things around a little bit today, but I'm going to review the agenda that's on your screen. First of all, Graham's going to talk a little bit about the McCutcheon versus FEC decision. Then he's going to follow up by talking about the potential lawsuit by the RNC regarding the creation of party-specific super PACs. That's actually number 6 on the list. We're going to move that up to number 2. We're then going to take a look at the review of the recent advisory opinion regarding Bitcoin with Neil, and then a review of the activities of working groups on campaign finance reform and the upcoming meeting at the FEC in June regarding party committees. That's some important stuff that the ASDC has been working on. Next is the review of rules regarding the dissemination of pre-primary exempt activities with Neil. And then 6th, discussion of potential lawsuit by Republican state parties regarding donors covered by SEC pay-to-play rules. That's also going to be Neil. And last, we're going to talk about the new DNC analytic tools and volunteer modeling that they are pushing out. So we've got a lot of stuff to cover today, and I know our panelists are going to be presenting and also bringing up points. But I really encourage all of you, if you have any questions about this material, to please chime in by typing in, as Janae said, where it says type a message, please. So without further ado, Graham, could you bring us in by talking to us a little bit about the McCutcheon FEC?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jackson, and thanks everybody for giving me the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. So probably as most of you are already aware, on April 2nd, the Supreme Court issued its opinion in McCutcheon v. FEC, striking down the biennial aggregate limits, or kind of the total overall cap on how much an individual can contribute to all candidates and parties combined. There was a lot of stuff in the press right after this came out that, I saw some headlines like Supreme Court strikes down contribution limits, right? So there's a lot of kind of misinformation out about that. But I thought that I would just go over quickly the basics of that holding, but then move quickly to what this could mean for state parties as some of the national party committees and candidates push towards joint fundraising and what you should expect and be on the lookout for. So the basics of the holding was that it concerned the biennial aggregate limit. The biennial aggregate limit is a little bit multifaceted. Before it changes every election cycle, but essentially it puts a total limit on how much any one individual can give to all candidates combined. In 2013 and 14, that limit was $48,600. So if a donor was going to max out to the primary and the general, $2,600 apiece for a total of $5,200, you do that 7, 8, 9 times, you're going to run up against that $48,600 limit. It would, prior to McCutcheon, it was illegal to max out to 10 different campaigns, for example. In addition to that candidate aggregate limit, there was a separate aggregate limit on all PACs and parties. You could not give more than $74,600 to all PACs and parties combined. So the federal limit for state parties is $10,000, and the federal limit for national party committees was $32,400. So for the biggest donors out there, you can hit that $74,600 cap really quickly. For example, let's just take it at the national party level. You could not max out to the DNC, the DSCC, and the DCCC in an election cycle. It would be over that limit. Similarly, you couldn't max out to, for example, to 8 different state parties. You would hit that limit. And between state parties and national committees, there was kind of a third aspect to this limit, where no more than 48,600 could go to any PACs and parties other than the national party committees. So there was kind of a carve-out where for the biggest donors, they were, in order to even get up to the maximum limit, they kind of had to give to the national parties rather than the state parties. So, that all those kind of various limits and their iterations can be a little bit complicated, as was definitely demonstrated in the oral arguments before the Supreme Court. For those of you who feel like campaign finance law can be a little complicated, there were some justices who definitely got confused by how this rule works as well. So you're in good company. So now that is gone, what it means is the same contribution limits are in place to any individual party or PAC or candidate. You can't give more than 10 to a state party still. You can't give more than 32.4 to the national party. You can't give more than 2,600 to a candidate. But you can make as many of those contributions as you would like. So what does this mean? What are the immediate implications? The easiest one is that for the biggest donors out there, they no longer have the excuse that, oh, sorry, I can't give to you. I've already hit my my cycle limit. That excuse is gone. So one thing you should definitely do is if there are the kind of the wealthiest donors in your state who frequently hit this maximum limit, and I think there's only around, I don't know, I think there's about 1,000 in the country on the D side that kind of hit this limit every cycle. You can immediately go back to them and say, hey, great news for us, this limit's gone, another $10,000 in our federal account would be great. So that's kind of easy, low-hanging fruit. The next horizon, though, and what has gotten a lot of attention in the commentary is on super joint fundraising committees. If there are, joint fundraising committees, you set contribution limits, right? So if there is a joint fundraising committee between the state party and a Senate campaign, you can take one check for $15,200. You can stack the limits. So if there's no aggregate cap, you can kind of stack that, up to the sky. I think it's, for those of you who had to deal with OVF, the Obama Victory Fund, big presidential joint fundraising committee last cycle, I think looking at that kind of helps put this in perspective. The kind of maximum anyone could give to the Obama Victory Fund over the course of last election cycle was $75,800. And you get there because there's, you stack two contributions to the DNC of $30,800. You take a $5,000 contribution to the campaign, and then you are immediately going to butt up against that. Last cycle, the kind of party PAC limit was $70,800. So there was a bunch of state parties in there, but you would hit that limit with just another small amount of contributions. If OVF was in place right now, a joint committee between, I don't know, it was like 12 or 15 battleground states, let's just say 10 battleground states for ease of thinking about it, 10 battleground states, the DNC, and a presidential campaign, you could write a check for $135,600, right? So immediately we're just going, just as OVF was structured last cycle, you could write a bigger check. But why stop at battleground states? You know, if a presidential campaign wanted to set up a joint fundraising committee between the presidential campaign and all 50 state parties, suddenly you are going to be able to accept a $505,000 check into that joint fundraising committee. So this is all good news, right? I mean, the super PACs are out there able to go to their, these huge donors and ask for, $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 checks, where the party committees haven't been able to take advantage of that. Well, even though our contribution limits haven't changed, by exploring these joint fundraising committees, we can explore taking big checks like that and moving some of those big donors back to inside the party structure. So I would be, I know the national party committees are thinking about different iterations and what makes the most sense, and I'm sure that some of those conversations are going on all over the place. So be on the lookout for different iterations of these joint fundraising committees coming in the future. I think one important compliance flag here is that probably a lot of different candidates, different national party committees are going to want to do these joint fundraising setups with the state parties. Well, because essentially, right, that gives them another $10,000 that they can, $10,000 limit they can stack. So we can imagine easily where the DCCC would want to set up a big joint fundraising committee with a bunch of state parties to fund coordinated campaigns. The DSCC, might want to do the same thing, focus on Senate races. The DNC might want to do the same thing, focus on presidential. And you might be asked to, kind of take part in all of these joint fundraising committees. The trick is you still only have one $10,000 per year contribution limit on the federal side. So even if you are kind of participating in one of these super joint fundraising committees that is focused on congressional races, Senate races, and the presidential, you still only have that one $10,000 cap for each donor to work with. So this is a great opportunity, but it is going to provide, it's going to create a real challenge for tracking your own contribution limits and how they are affected by participation in a lot of different big joint fundraising committees all at once. So I think that is an obstacle that will have to be surmounted in order to make this work if there's a push for a lot of different big committees like that. And also here on the screen, I see that this is a quick one-page summary that has, I know some of these, it's hard to follow some of these numbers on the phone. So
yeah, and we're going to send out, by the way, Graham, just to let people know that I will send out this document to the executive directors and the compliance listservs once this call is over.
Great. Yeah, it's just a quick one-pager with a brief summary. But if you have donors who have questions, it can be helpful. So there was one very interesting quote from Roberts in the decision that could really have some significant impact on the party committees in the future. What this was about is, that you need a justification, an acceptable constitutional justification to limit contributions, right? Because it's an impingement on our First Amendment rights. So what kind of justification can support a contribution limit? Well, Roberts was talking about is really only, quid pro quo arrangements with candidates, right? That's what we really need to look at if we're going to justify a contribution limit. And one thing they said about parties is there's this, in the past there had been this concern, well, parties are so closely associated with candidates. It is also, potentially corrupting to give big contributions to parties directly. Roberts kind of pushed back on that in this decision. I'll just read a brief quote. He said, of course a candidate would be pleased with a donor who contributed not only to the candidate but also to other candidates from the same party, to party committees, and to PACs supporting the parties. But there's a clear line between those base limits funneled to the candidate, for which a candidate will feel obligated, and money that is given simply to a candidate's party, which the candidate, like all members of the party, feels grateful, and the implication there is not exactly obligated. When donors furnish widely distributed support, all members of the party or supporters of that cause may benefit, and the leaders of the party or cause may feel gratitude. That gratitude stems from the basic nature of the party system, in which party members join together to further common political beliefs, and citizens can choose to support a party because they share some or most of all those beliefs. But to recast this shared interest standing alone as an opportunity for quid pro quo corruption would dramatically expand government regulation of the political process. So that's a little wordy, but broken down, what he's talking about is, just because you're supporting a party, it doesn't turn into necessarily corruption or a quid pro quo arrangement with a candidate. So this quote could really prove useful in kind of expanding parties' rights going forward. And this moves directly into the number 2, which is the RNC, who doesn't have any compunction about the importance of keeping big money out of politics like many Democrats do. There's been press reports that they are going to jump on this right away. They are going to, there's been some press reports that they are going to, or are planning to file a lawsuit that stems, from this idea in McCutcheon to say, well, hey, if there's no risk of quid pro quo corruption when you are giving directly to a party, it's only when you're kind of passing along to a candidate, parties should be able to have super PACs. Parties can do IEs already, right? But you have to fund them with hard money on the federal level. So the lawsuit will say, if there's no risk of corruption giving directly to a party, then we should be able to take unlimited contributions from any source we want at the federal level, as long as that's only going to be used for independent activity. Essentially a super PAC within every state or national party, should you choose to set one up. That would have to be independent from the candidates you're supporting, but would allow you to kind of run TV ads and take unlimited money to fund those independent activities. So that will really be probably the next frontier of this continued Supreme Court litigation, and that hasn't been filed yet, but we'll see where that goes. It'll be very interesting to watch and see whether that will allow for essentially what every I know a number of party committees have said, when can I get my own super PAC? You can't now, but maybe we'll see how this case goes. The last thing I'll say on kind of McCutcheon-related news is this obviously has an effect on state laws too, where states have similar kind of aggregate limits. So I know that Massachusetts and Maryland, if you guys are on the phone, they've already come out and said that they're going to not enforce their limits. I think Mass's was 12,000 and Maryland was 10,000 and Wisconsin had one that was 10,000. All those are gone. Just like the federal limit, those have been deemed unconstitutional and are in effect. There's a bunch of other states that hasn't been settled out yet. Connecticut, Maine, New York, Rhode Island, Wyoming, Puerto Rico also have those kind of same biennial aggregate limits or some variation, and probably those will come down or stop being enforced in the very near future as well.
Great. Does anybody have any questions for Graham?
I'd like to add just some practical perspective on it with respect to joint fundraising. That as you're being approached to set up joint fundraisers, there's some questions that you all need to have in mind. One, everyone should agree on who the treasurer is and be comfortable with who that treasurer is. And you have to answer who is going to maintain the records, who is going to have authorization to write checks, whether electronic or paper, who is going to have access to those records. If you're not, the committee the state committee, for instance, is not going to provide the treasurer and maintain the accounts, are they going to get copies of all the records of the committee so that they can assure that it's complying with any contribution limits that apply to it? You should be very comfortable how you report any transfers from the Joint Fundraising Committee and make sure you get the necessary information to fully report them, and be in a position that you can continuously track contributions made to the Joint Fundraising Committee.
Okay. Anything else, Neil? Anything you want to add on those two? Okay. All right. Just a reminder that we're about 20 minutes in. We've still got a lot of topics to cover here, so just a heads up. So with that, Neil, can you talk to us about the advisory opinion regarding Bitcoin?
Sure, I can do that. So the FEC had been struggling with the issue of Bitcoin for quite a while, and after a couple of tries, they have finally come up with an advisory opinion to approve Bitcoin, albeit in a very limited way. Now, for those of you who don't know what Bitcoin is a new form of currency, for lack of a better description, that is being used on the internet for electronic transactions. And I suppose it's started as kind of a barter system, but I think the Bitcoin folks are trying to create a new kind of electronic way of transacting business on the internet using an alternative currency. And Bitcoin has now its own exchange rate. It's constantly changing like any other commodity, and it's not something you could just jump into. And I suspect when I'm done describing it, I would be surprised if anyone was really interested in using or accepting Bitcoin. But it is, becoming a hot topic. I do have candidate clients who have already set up Bitcoin ability to receive Bitcoin contributions online, and so there's a movement afoot in the political community to do this, but it's kind of one of those do-at-your-own risk, and it's not very simple to do.
Neil, so, has anybody you know received contributions via Bitcoin yet, or is it still too
I have a candidate client, and if you want to look at his website just to see how he does it, his name is Jared Polis, and he's a congressman from Colorado. And although he wasn't one of the requesters, he was following this very closely, and he had a Bitcoin contribution page up within hours of the advisory opinion. Huh. So if you went to jaredpolisforcongress.com, you can check out his Contribute by Bitcoin page if you want to see how this works.
Okay.
The thing about Bitcoin, because it's not a common, a normal type of currency, the FEC kind of struggled on how to deal with it. So without getting into all of the details, I'll just give a couple of highlights from the advisory opinion. One of the things they struggled with was if they were going to allow it, how much they were going to allow contributors to contribute as a maximum. And the thing about the advisory opinion was that the advisory opinion requester of the second opinion that got approved represented that they were only going to accept contributions in Bitcoin up to $100. And the Republican FEC commissioners took this as a representation of the requester and said in a statement after the, and I can send you the statement so you can look them up. In a statement after the opinion was done, that they wouldn't have stopped at $100. They would have let the requester go all the way up to the federal limits. The Democratic FEC commissioners put out an opposing statement saying that we're stopping at $100. We don't feel comfortable allowing people to contribute more than $100 of Bitcoin. Frankly, I don't know. I don't believe the Democratic commissioners have a basis in law to take this position, but that's the position they've taken. Mm-hmm. So as a practical matter, 6 commissioners have approved the acceptance of Bitcoin up to $100, and only 3 have approved acceptance of Bitcoin over $100. So accept the Bitcoin over $100 at your own risk, I suppose, if you want to do that. Bitcoin is a lot different than, say, taking a credit card contribution. Although the basic, first donor page is similar to a credit card contribution, after that it's very different. There's several procedural steps that have to happen to accept Bitcoin, and then what you can do with the Bitcoin. So there's Bitcoin actually, in order to take Bitcoin, which you generally will take online only, you have to do a fair amount of programming to do it, because every Bitcoin donation has to somehow get assigned a randomized letter or number code so that that Bitcoin contribution can be readily identified. So there is some specific customization you have to do. You probably really have to set up a Bitcoin page. The Bitcoin contribution itself, because you're not getting a monetary contribution, it has to be liquidated, and there's a whole process, and I sent Jonay to send out to you all a copy of the advisory opinion, a memo that our firm wrote summarizing the advisory opinion, and in the memo it actually gives reporting examples that the FEC provided in their opinion. But the FEC is essentially treating the receipt of Bitcoin the same way they treat an in-kind contribution, or more similarly the way they treat when you get, say, a donation of stock. So you get the contribution in Bitcoin. You can't just deposit it right into a bank account. You actually have to liquidate it in the Bitcoin market, which is constantly changing. So you may end up making a profit or a loss on the actual Bitcoin contribution. Again, so you liquidate it, and then you can take it into revenue. You can liquidate multiple Bitcoin contributions at one time. You don't have to liquidate each Bitcoin contribution one at a time. But just understand it's kind of like taking in security. You have to take it in and then sell it on the Bitcoin market, and then you can have the contribution from there. So it's, I guess, essentially a new kind of contribution. Whether it's going to take off or not remains to be seen. And just know that the FEC itself right now has only unanimously approved Bitcoin contributions up to $100. Now, if you took more than $100, there wouldn't be 4 votes to say you accepted an illegal contribution, but there aren't 4 votes to say you took a legal contribution. So it's kind of a legal purgatory. I suspect there will be people who go over $100, but that is the the current legal framework. I'm happy to take any questions about Bitcoin, but I just wanted to give a brief summary of it.
Okay, but I think one of the main points here, if this does come up for any state parties, just probably get in touch with Neil.
Yeah, I mean you have to be set up to take Bitcoin. That's the key here. You can't just decide, okay, I've got a Bitcoin donor, let him give. It's a really very specific, burdensome process to be set up to take Bitcoin. So it's going to take a fair amount of advanced planning if you want to be able to accept Bitcoin. So that's the big moral of the story.
Great.
This is all laid out in the memo that Jonay will be forwarding to everyone after the call.
Any comments,
Jackson?
Carl?
Yeah, Jackson. I'd like to make a couple points, and maybe in defense of the Democratic commissioners, is that no one quite knows whether it's a Bitcoin is a currency, whether it's a security, or it's a form of commercial paper. Now, if it's a currency, then are the restrictions that apply to cash applicable to Bitcoin? If it's a security, then you're going to have to pay tax on the gain, if any, when you sell it. And if it's a form of commercial paper, it's kind of a hybrid of the two. So with respect to accepting Bitcoins, you better keep in mind that you have to have some means of valuing it, and then when you sell it, that you may be subject to tax on the selling of the Bitcoin.
If you make a profit.
Okay.
Right. If what Carl is saying is if the value increases during the time you have it to sell it, it's like selling a security. You have to pay probably a tax on a difference.
Okay. So moving on, unless
Jackson,
there's any questions.
We do have
questions.
We do have one additional question in our question box. The question is, what is the potential issue with accepting Bitcoin contributions from foreign nationals?
It's a contribution just like any other contribution, so you have to screen, just like you have to screen a credit card contribution from foreign nationals, you will have to do the same for Bitcoin. It can only be contributed by an eligible contributor. And that would be for federal or non-federal. And of course, this opinion only covers the contribution of federal Bitcoin, the federal accounts. It really doesn't discuss or regulate the ability of state contributions under Bitcoin. That's going to be a state question, except for the foreign national point.
Okay. All right, well, let's move on then to the next point, the review of activities of the Working Group on Campaign Finance Reform and the upcoming meeting at the FEC in June. So, Neil?
We've had a fair amount of movement since we last talked. Some very exciting things have happened. So it's.
Can you, Neil, just for the review of people that might be new to the call, can you give like a 3-minute background?
Absolutely. So there is currently a working group of chairs, executive directors, and staff that talk on a regular basis about trying to make campaign finance law easier for state parties on many levels, both to function as an organization and for compliance purposes. And those of you who have been following these calls for a long time know we've been talking about this for a long time. Well, based upon the fruits of our labor, back in December, I think, right? The New Orleans meeting was either late November or December. I can't remember exactly when. But,
Late November.
Late November. When we were in New Orleans at the ASDC meeting, we had presented a resolution and a kind of a summary of our views of what we need done as state parties for campaign finance law. And that resolution and summary were unanimously adopted by the entire Association of State Democratic Chairs by voice vote at the New Orleans meeting. So we're very excited about that. Since then, several things have been happening on different fronts. First of all, we've presented those documents to states so that they can start passing state-specific resolutions as well, so we can get some momentum in the states. And I don't know if you have the exact number, Jackson, but I know a handful of states have been successful.
It might even be a dozen by now.
Wow, that's fantastic. Mm-hmm. So several states have passed resolutions similar to or identical to the resolution we passed in New Orleans through their state central committees. So we're really, right now, step one of our process is, and this is a several-step process, which could take a very long time, or may never happen at all, but the goal is to build grassroots support for the idea at the Democratic side, which is kind of revolutionary in my opinion, that we have problems with that part of McCain-Feingold that overregulates state parties and federal law in general, and something needs to be done. Who is our target audience here? Well, our ultimate target audience are generally Democratic senators, because I'm sure if and when we approach the Republican Party in the House, and I have talked to them informally, we'll have a very receptive audience. So that we control the Senate, we need to dialogue with and get Democratic senators on board to move this forward right now. Now, doing that is a multi-pronged strategy. It is our members showing that we're serious about this through the passage of these resolutions. It is getting press and getting thought leaders on these issues talking about state parties, whether it be an editorial, whether it be getting studies produced, whether it's me writing articles about it or anybody else who can write articles about it. And third, it's trying to get private meetings with senators so that we can have an in-person discussion with them to explain our problem. So, we've been very successful in the first two, and hopefully that will lead to success in the third area. More recently, I wrote an article in Campaigns and Elections. It got published in Campaigns and Elections magazine in early April, talking about McCain-Feingold. And of course, as you can imagine, I spent a fair amount of my ink talking about how it's affected state parties. From that, I got invited to testify a couple of weeks ago. The Senate Rules Committee held a hearing on campaign finance, and I was actually invited not by the majority staff, but by the minority staff to testify, along with my co-author of the article, who is a former Republican FEC commissioner. And I got 6 minutes to testify, and my 6 minutes of fame, I used all 6 minutes to talk about state parties. So it was a lot of fun, and I got our message out there in a much more public stage than I ever thought I would at this point. The next big exciting thing that's happening is the FEC. There's two new FEC commissioners, a Democrat and Republican, and they're sort of shaking things up over there. And one of the things they've decided to do, and I've been talking to them a lot privately about various party issues, is to hold a public listening hearing about party committees. So we're going to have an opportunity now to air our views out in front of the Federal Election Commission. And I've kind of gotten several chairs and executive directors and a couple of compliance people who have agreed to come to this meeting. And we're all going to say our piece in front of the FEC. A big part of the problems that we face are not necessarily regulatory, it's mostly statutory, but there are some regulatory issues we can address, and we're excited about the chance to do that. The hearing is open to both national and state parties, but I suspect that most of the energy will go towards, hopefully, the state party stuff. One of the items in my action agenda for that meeting, if I accomplish anything, I want to convince the FEC that the way they approach payroll, the 25% test, is actually incorrect. That what they're doing now by requiring federal election activity, 11 activities, to be included in the calculation is not required in the statute. So that would go a long way in defederalizing a lot of our payroll. So if I can accomplish anything at that meeting, that's the one goal I have. There's a lot of other goals, but that's one of the primary things. Again, since a lot of what we're dealing with are the structural problems are statutory, we really need Congress to do that. So that's on June 4th. Hopefully we'll get a helpful audience from the FEC. I know some reporters will be there too, so that'll give us an opportunity for more press. I actually have a couple of meetings set up with senators on the same day with some of the state chairs that are going to be in town. So we're going to start, phase 3 of this is going to start as well. And we'll see where it goes from there. But we're really excited about the progress. I don't know, Jackson, if you want to say anything about this from your own personal experience.
Not right now, other than that the ball is definitely rolling and it's moving in our direction. And I know, Neil, you've done a lot of work on this, and I know from a staff point of view, if you're an executive director, a compliance director, or maybe there's a chair on this call, it's just something to be aware of, but also something if you get a chance to sit down with your chair or your executive director to ask them about a little bit, just to make sure that your state is actively participating and trying to move a resolution forward like this.
It's an incredibly uphill climb, but I wouldn't, I can't look myself in the mirror if I didn't die trying to do this. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to keep going until, all hope is lost.
You won't die. All right. Don't worry.
Just a metaphor, hopefully.
Yeah. We'll keep an eye on you. So
thank you.
Let's. Any questions about that? The campaign finance reform and upcoming meeting. And Neil, that meeting is June 4th. Is that correct?
June 4th. Yeah, and the timing is very fortuitous because it's the day before we start an ASDC meeting. So a lot of people's travel schedules were just merely coming in a day early. So I was able to garner some really good attendance with the meeting from the state chairs and EPs.
Okay. And we don't have any additional questions in our questions queue.
Yep.
We don't?
We do not.
Okay. I'm ready to move on then.
Number 5, review of rules regarding the dissemination of pre-primary exempt activities. And Neil, we've got about 20 minutes left for the next 3 questions.
Okay, I can roll through these real fast. I just put this out there because a lot of states primaries are coming up and filing deadlines, so I wanted to remind them because I get this question a lot. I thought it would be a good time to remind everyone about the rule, especially as we start voter contact, about doing exempt activities before the primary, especially volunteer mail. The FEC issued an advisory opinion a few years ago that clarified that you cannot start doing exempt activities unless there are two time condition precedents. First, because the statute says it's on behalf of the nominee, you cannot start doing volunteer mail. We'll use volunteer mail as our example. You cannot start doing volunteer exempt mail until one of 2 things have happened. Either first, the filing deadline has passed for the primary and only one candidate has qualified for the primary, or the primary has actually occurred. So again, I'll repeat that in more practical terms. If you have multiple candidates in a primary, you cannot start doing exempt mail until after the primary. If you have filing deadline and only one candidate qualifies, you can actually start doing volunteer mail after the final day of qualifying. I get this question a lot, so I thought it would be a good chance to review it based on the timing of this call. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a reminder.
Good point. Any questions about that? About timelines?
And also, just in the same vein, for those of you who have qualifying deadlines, your 11 window for GOTV, GOTV, voter ID, and generic campaign activity is probably going to be starting at the same time.
All right, if there's no questions, then let's move on to the next question. The discussion of potential lawsuit by Republican state parties regarding...
I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes on this. I promised a lawyer who approached me about this that I would share it with the Democratic Party, and I'll get this out to the compliance and probably the ED. Jonah, we should probably send this to the ED's list too. Many of you have dealt with the fact that people who are in the financial services industry cannot give to your committee. If they do, it's a very limited amount, or you have to promise only to use it for administrative purposes. Well, we were approached by a Republican law firm who are looking for a bipartisan plaintiffs for a potential lawsuit to challenge the constitutionality of the SEC rules. These are not Federal Election Commission rules. These are Securities Exchange Commission rules that regulate pay-to-play practices by the securities industry. I have sent Jonah a bunch of memos and documents from the attorneys for your review at your earliest convenience. I don't have a very specific position on whether I'm not encouraging or discouraging anyone from joining the lawsuit, but I thought you'd just look at it, and if anyone is interested in joining the lawsuit or have questions about it, they can just contact me offline. So basically, the bottom line is that they're looking for plaintiffs. You basically be a plaintiff, and they represented to me that there would be no cost to the state party plaintiffs who joined, that they would be doing this pro bono, so there would, it wouldn't be any effective cost to you. But again, they're just looking for named plaintiffs to join the suit that show it as a bipartisan challenge. Again, I don't have a specific position on whether you should do it or not. I just do it out. I'm throwing it out there. Because I know a lot of state parties have had problems with this and have complained to me that it's burdensome. And, you know, there's probably a lot of money you're losing because of this rule. So I'll take questions if anyone has one now. Otherwise, if you have questions about this, probably the best thing to do is just contact me directly.
Okay.
One thing I'd note there, Jackson, is that many states have pay-to-play laws, and including many separate municipalities have their own pay-to-play laws. To the extent those laws restrict money given to, not directly to a candidate, but to a party or some third party entity, they may be vulnerable under the McCutcheon decision.
Janae, are there any questions from attendees today about this?
There are no additional questions in our questions box.
Well, with that, let's move on to the last part, the discussion of the new DNC analytic tools and volunteer modeling that they're going to be pushing out.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag a couple compliance issues around this.
Neil, Graham, can you talk a little bit louder? Your phone's coming in a little quiet.
Yeah, absolutely. How's that?
Much better.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of what's going on here. You know, the DNC Tech Department with Project Ivy is, you know, this program that they are pushing out, and one of their central pillars is to make as much technology software, data software, modeling tools available to the state parties as possible. And it's really a great thing for state parties because when, just like the voter file kind of passes from the DNC to state parties and then the state parties get to use that with their candidates, this essentially works in the same way with this kind of modeling and technology where the DNC, instead of like working directly with candidates, is working to empower state parties by giving them these tools that then they can turn around and offer to federal and non-federal candidates alike in their states. So, you know, there'll be a couple things coming down the pike as we get closer to the election. You know, I know that there's been these tools available last year or last cycle, but again, you know, like a polling place lookup tool, a neighbor-to-neighbor call tool, all these things that are really, you know, state parties can use for coordinated campaigns, but also make sure that they are, you know, providing to candidates in their states. And, you know, really it's a good opportunity to build up the role of the state party by leveraging these kind of technology and data tools that the DNC are providing to them. The two that are, I believe, in motion right as we speak are, first, you know, there's been a demand for a long time from state parties for information about all the volunteers that engaged around the Obama re-election and even in 2008. So the DNC is working with all of that data they did obtain from the campaign to create a volunteer model. So it's not only just who are the volunteers who volunteered last cycle, but we can figure out who are the people who will volunteer based on the attributes of you know, people who have signed up to volunteer in the past, and accordingly, you know, can run that against the voter file and help state parties identify who they should be reaching out to build up their volunteer networks. So there was an agreement that I believe 48 out of 50 state parties have signed in order to be able to get that modeling. I understand from Andrew Brown at the DNC that in the very near future, I believe, you know, no later than like the first week of June or so, that modeling will actually be pushed out on the voter file. So that is great, and don't forget to make sure to use it and pass it on to your parties or your candidates. The one kind of compliance issue there to be aware of is that the goal is to really create a long-term sustaining volunteer model for all Democrats across the country to use through the voter file. And the only way that can work is, it's, you know, this isn't a one-time thing. Okay, great, here's the Obama model, like let it, you know, here's Obama volunteers, and it's done. But this is a an attempt to create this volunteer model that only gets better and only can continue to help Democrats identify likely volunteers going forward. So in order to do that, the DNC also needs information about volunteers that have signed up to work with campaigns. Now, I've seen a number of state party campaign voter file agreements. Most of them require, the candidates to kind of give information about their volunteers back to the state parties, and then the state party can share it with the DNC to use for this modeling. Not used for direct contact or fundraising, just used for the modeling. But you should make sure that your voter file agreements that you use with your candidates do provide that you get those volunteers back so that they can also be added into this model and create something that is really strong and works across the country to help us identify volunteers. So keep an eye on those agreements. Similar, the other thing that the DNC has been pushing out from the tech department right now is a new analytics tool that works with this database called Vertica. There's been so much attention over the past cycle about all the analytics work that the Obama campaign did to kind of identify and test everything, that they did at any time. This is really the tool that those analysts use, right? It's a technology software that allows a state party, candidates in your state, or vendors working for you to kind of perform those analytics. You still need the body, the data scientists to crunch the numbers, but they absolutely need the software to kind of do those analytics, and it's something that the DNC has spent a ton of money and a ton of time building, and is now providing to all state parties and empowering state parties to then turn around and also provide that analytics tool to candidates. So it is another thing that will work just like the voter file. One key thing there is that the DNC absolutely wants to use this as a party building tool to keep the party strong. And some people have been irritated, from cycle to cycle, where too much kind of work is privatized, and goes out to consultants, and valuable technology and resources just kind of get spun off into the private sector rather than really staying within the party to make the party strong. So one key thing here is that the DNC is making sure that it doesn't want to give away the keys to this valuable software and analytics tools that it's been working and giving to state parties to every vendor out there under the sun. So vendors are free to, if you use Catalyst or Civis or Blue Labs or anybody like that to kind of do analytics for you, they will want to use this software, and that's great. But as part of that agreement, the DNC is also passing on an end-user license agreement, which is just something that you will need to get either your vendors or your employees who are kind of doing this analytics to sign, to make sure that we keep this data, we keep this technology, we keep this software protected for the party rather than just letting it spin off to wherever else it might go. So those are agreements out there. I think Andrew said about 20 parties have already signed on to get that analytics software and are up and using it, which is great. If you should check if if someone at your state party is using this software already, using Vertica, and has not signed those analytics agreements, I think in a couple of weeks they're going to start shutting stuff off unless they have that, just to make sure that they can kind of keep this all within the party structure. But this is a really exciting tool, and another thing that you should be able to use, and also empower state parties by having something really valuable that every campaign will be interested in using and will come to the state party to get.
Great. Any questions? There might be a few questions about this. And if you have any questions, type them into the box or raise your hand on that.
There was a question earlier about how to spell.
But I'm sure we're going to be hearing more about it. I'm sorry, Janae, can you repeat that, please?
Sure. There was a question earlier about how to spell the software that that was referred to, and it's Vertica, V-E-R-T-I-C-A.
Okay.
And there are no additional questions at this time.
I know it's something that Andrew has been talking about to a bunch of data technology folks that came into the DNC in March, and will also be a kind of crucial part of the continued presentations of State Party on the tech data side. So it's something that everybody excited about.
Great. Okay, well, Neil and Graham and Karl, do you guys have anything else you want to mention? Anything kind of moving forward that folks should be keeping their eye on?
I'm doing great. I'm hoping to have more opportunities this year to continue training. We just had a great training in Chicago last week, and we had about 15 or 16 state parties represented, and it went really well. And to me, everybody needs to be trained. I mean, there's so much information about how to comply. So I hope everyone has the opportunity this cycle to attend some training, whether we do something short or long. I'm hoping to create, and Dana Howitt and with Jackson, and we're hoping to create more opportunities to train. So I just want
Neil, with that being said, was there a tentative schedule for the next one of these trainings?
No, we don't have anything specific yet. It's all supply and demand, right? So if there's enough need and desire, we'll be there.
Okay, I know it's traditionally they've been held in the spring, and usually once a year is kind of what we've been at the last couple.
But if there's overwhelming demand, whether it be regional or something else, Dana and I are happy to bring our show on the road. So we will be there for the masses if they need it.
Awesome. All right. Anything else, Graham, Karl?
No, happy to join today. Really appreciate it.
Great. Well, I know that Janae is going to be sending out some additional materials here, and you can see that the contact information for Neil, Graham, and Karl is available on your screen right now. So if you have any follow-up questions on any of those topics, please feel free to get in touch with them. So with that, Janae, thanks again so much for putting this together. It's greatly appreciated. Do you have anything else that you want to throw in, Janae?
So thank you to Jackson, thank you to Neil and Karl and Graham, and thank you to all of you for joining. And don't forget your webinar evaluation that will come to your inbox here shortly. Additionally, there will be attached the materials that were referenced on today's call, the memos, and other useful pieces of information that came from Neil and Graham and Karl. So look out for that.
All right. Well, with that, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again.
Fantastic.
Thanks.